WorldAlign is an online journal aimed at provoking thought and opinion, with the hope to start and deepen conversations between communities and within communities, out of which we may become a better world.
In other words, you find things that are unexplained. The original cell and its complexity, consciousness, morality. And in a sense, the atheist goes, well, you find something that science hasn't explained, a gap, and you attribute that to God. And for the atheist, the gap is a kind of a little nuisance. In other words, science is going to come along around the corner and fill this gap, and pretty soon we won't have to worry about it anymore. I want to try to show you why this is a very not anti-religious, very unscientific way to think. In the time of the Ptolemaic universe, you had a lot of gaps. Ptolemy's theory couldn't account for the motions of the planets. And so there were efforts to fill these gaps by making up epicycles. But it took the genius of Copernicus and later Galileo to see, wait a minute, this isn't some irritating gap, some little lacuna of knowledge. No, the whole idea is wrong. We have to change the underlying assumption and we get a deeper comprehension of reality. Similarly, in the Newtonian universe, which had been verified through the entire Industrial Revolution, it predicted a lot of things with great accuracy. There was a small gap. The planet Mercury in its orbit deviated by a very tiny percentage from what Newton predicted. A gap. And a lot of, you might say, atheists of that time went, well, this is nothing. This is minor, a tiny gap. In other words, we're going to be figuring it out with conventional science in no time. It took the genius of an Einstein to see, wait a minute, no, that so-called gap is a clue that something is wrong with the entire Newtonian understanding of space and time. A complete reformulation is required in order to get a deeper understanding of reality. So what I'm trying to get here is a lot of our atheists who claim the mantle of science are actually, you might say, pilgrim scientists. They're not themselves scientists, but they borrow the authority of science to use it as a battering ram against religion. In fact, their own attitude is deeply unscientific and in some senses deeply irrational. Thank you.
And now we have rebuttals. And you are to begin.
Well, about
please.
Okay. How long is it? Can it be as long as Dinesh? You lie. No. I have to snarl better than that. Okay. Well, here's one thing I do know a bit about, which is textual criticism. That's how I know, for example, and could as near as I could satisfy anyone say that the Quran was not dictated by God, but was thrown together by primates. And the same would be true, as is now conceded by almost all schools of Christianity, about both the Old and the New Testament. So when it comes to Hamlet, I can not prove, I don't have to prove it was written by somebody, as Dinesh weirdly suggests. I might make a puzzle out of that, but here's how I would proceed. I would say, well, if it's written by someone born in Stratford-on-Avon, who died on the 23rd of February 1616, I know this much. He'd have had to know about a certain episode in Danish history that happened not before that date, not after that date. Otherwise it wouldn't work. The same would be true of the stories of Macbeth and many others. Now, I've done that. I also believe I've understood English really quite well, and probably have had at least some knowledge of Latin and Greek. But I couldn't with certainty go any further than that. And if I met someone who said, well, I think it's the Earl of Oxford, because the Earl of Oxford spent so much time in Italy, seems to have understood the Renaissance there, seems to have been to Verona, to Venice, to Florence, seems to have understood just a little bit more than Petrarch, I could only say, well, it's true that we don't have any evidence Shakespeare went to Italy, but we do have a lot of evidence that the Earl of Oxford died before that date, and that therefore he can't have written Othello. It's a matter of not what you think, ladies and gentlemen, but it's very much a matter of how you think. And inadvertently, at any rate, in my time so young, I would say that Dinesh has underlined and illustrated that distinction very deftly at his own expense. Thank you.
I think one of the striking things about this argument and this debate is I think you'll notice that as the debate unfolds, Christopher tends to shift ground ever so subtly. So for example, I was arguing...
I have to keep up. Oh, sorry.
I was arguing that if you're faced with a complex play, like Hamlet, it is reasonable to posit a playwright. The play didn't write itself. Monkeys banging on typewriters didn't produce this. Somebody intelligent wrote it. Now, notice I didn't say who. You would have to correctly infer the qualities of the writer from the play itself. So Christopher shifts ground, unable to contest that. He says, well, now let's debate who was the writer. Was he actually the Earl of Oxford? Was he the Stratford guy? I didn't get there. I'm simply saying if we look at the universe, and it's quite a universe, the guy who did it probably would have to have a lot of power. If he was not omnipotent, he would have to be close to it. Second of all, if the universe is in fact fine-tuned for life, then in some sense whoever did it, and we still don't know who it was, would have to be concerned in some sense about us. Why? Because he rigged the rules in such a way that we could be here and contemplate the universe that is before us. When you come to the historicity of Christ, which Christopher has alluded to a few times, I don't think you would find 2% of living historians of the period who would deny that Jesus Christ existed. Christopher has gotten I don't know who he's been reading, but he's got this sort of crackpot idea that in a sense, this is all guesswork and made up, when the truth of it is you may debate the miracles or the resurrection, but here you have an event that is as well attested as just about any event in the ancient world. How do we know Caesar crossed the Rubicon? How do we know Alexander the Great won the Battle of Gaugamela? How do we know that Socrates walked the streets of Athens? The level of testimony using a uniform historical standard. That same level of testimony affirms that there was a man, Christ, who walked the streets of Jerusalem, who made a lot of converts, who became very unpopular with the authorities. They killed him. His disciples thought they saw him again. They initiated a massive movement that essentially converted over time, first a large part of the Roman Empire and then much of the world. All those events would be inexplicable if it was all made up. It makes no historical sense at all. And if you applied this kind of logic to any other historical event, Socrates didn't exist because the two people who wrote about him, Plato and Xenophon, were disciples. They liked his work, so they made the whole thing up. Most historians would laugh at you because while they may have exaggerated the achievements of Socrates, I don't think that there's a living philosopher in America who asserts that Socrates was fiction.